Yeah, I'm really excited to be here at Empire. I don't know which one of these mics is picking me up, but it makes me sound great. This is my first chance to speak at a New York City conference and not like a meetup or something like that, so it's really great. I have some ideas I want to share with you guys, and hopefully they get you excited about some things just before break time so you can go get more coffee and be buzzing with ideas. My name's Matthew Beale. The handle is Mixonic on some stuff. And I run a small company called 201 Create. We're just a bunch of consultants, but we've gotten to work with companies like Twitch and Condé Nast and WNYC and a whole bunch of other people. We do a lot of Ember work and things, and Ember.js core team. But today we're not going to talk about Ember. We're going to start with Fred Brooks. So this being a JavaScript conference, you would expect that I'd probably be quoting Dijkstra by now, because I've been up here for like 2 minutes. But we're going to talk about Fred Brooks instead, because I think he has the wisdom that we actually need as a JavaScript community. Fred Brooks is a guy who changed the byte size from 6 bits to 8 bits. And he did it to give us lowercase characters. He thought that was a worthwhile trade. 33% of the memory for all strings so that you can do lowercase characters. I think that's a really healthy trade-off. He's perhaps more well-known for having written the mythical Man Month, and there's a paper at the beginning called No Silver Bullet. In No Silver Bullet, he has this really good quote about software. Of all the monsters who fill the nightmares of our folklore, none terrify more than werewolves, because they transform unexpectedly from the familiar into horrors. Of these we seek bullets of silver that we can magically lay them to rest. And of course, the horrors are your own software. He says there is no silver bullet. Instead, he tries to break down the problem of software into 2 things, the essential challenges of software and the accidental problems. And the essential challenges are irreducible for any problem. These kind of define what it is that makes writing software a hard thing that we go to conferences to talk about. Accidental challenges are the challenges that arise just from attempting a solution in the first place, like NPM. Cool. So his essential challenges, he breaks down into 4 categories. The first one is conformity. And he contrasts this in his writing with physics. In physics, there's a unified theory, right? You're constantly on the hunt for what is the one grand solution that brings all these things together. In software, we have nothing like that. There is no grand unifying theory of any of the code that we write. Instead, it's always based on arbitrary things that are foisted upon us. Changeability, the fact that software is a thing that grows and changes over time. It has memory space. It can rewrite itself. We can have meta languages and things like that. Software is invisible. There's no way I can have a map and compare the rendering engine of React and Angular on a map. I can't do that. There's no physical space where I can show what this is. Instead, we have to talk about it. And this leads to not only problems thinking, but also problems communicating with other people. And his 4th one is just complexity. And complexity he means in the sense of something like chess or something like Go, where the number of multiple combinations of the thing that you have to deal with are just staggering. So there's more games of Go that you could play than there are atoms in the universe. This is like huge numbers of things. And I think when you think of all the bits that you could flip in your RAM and how many processor cycles you have a second, you're going to get to a number that's pretty huge as well. So these are his 4 irreducible things. And when we talk about editors for rich web content, I think that these are actually good to keep in mind. There's a lot of problems with conformity with text editors. What do you expect to happen if you have your cursor in between a bold character and a plain text character? Often the answer actually depends on what direction you were going beforehand or what you were doing. These are all contextual things that humans just expect, and we need to kind of reverse engineer what the humans want and then try and build solutions that match their expectations. The other part that he talks about is accidental complexity, and this is the problems that arise from having a solution at all. So when you choose a solution, maybe your solution is going to be incorrect and you're going to have problems with it. Maybe you have arbitrary limitations that are put upon you, like your computer has limited battery life and limited CPU speed and things like that. We make mistakes. We are humans and we have typos and we make bad decisions and we get tired and we stay out late and things like that, and we need to figure out how we can eliminate those. We have coworkers and we have offices and we have open office plans, which are really fantastic. We have tooling that doesn't always do what we expect. And we have other tooling that just sometimes is not there. And then the distractions also sometimes aren't there when the tooling isn't there. It's really frustrating. But when he draws the distinction, he does make sure to mention that accidental complexity is the thing that can actually be reduced. Right? So this is where we can pay down all the pain that we have in programming. The essential stuff is just the thing that we need to wrestle with. But the accidental, we can find ways with good abstractions to just slice away and make our lives easier. So last summer, our company started talking to Bustle about working on a content management system with them. They, of course, had a content management system. Bustle is a women's interest news website and product. and they have hundreds of editors and authors writing articles. Bustle has been like really, really great in supporting open source in general. They've sponsored a lot of support for Ember in Fastboot and the Glimmer rendering engine. And so when we talked to them, it was natural to try and figure out how we can solve this problem for them in the open source space. So we began with the editor that they had at the time, and it was this editor called Lovelace. And Lovelace uses what you might expect. It uses like a WYSIWYG HTML editor for the editing surface. I don't even remember which one, and it's not wildly important because a lot of them are very similar. It uses content editable. This is like CK editor, JWYSIWYG, or Quill, or Medium. There's like a Medium-editor on GitHub. There's a whole bunch of different options that you can have. They're pretty much all based on content editable. And content editable is, in case you're not familiar with it, is this tool where you can take a div or anything that's on the DOM, and you can say, I want to make this content editable. And then once it's editable, you can type in it, and it has some of the features that you expect from a word processor. It has cursors, you can highlight things, you can use hotkeys on things. But because it's very coupled to the DOM, it also has some interesting side effects, like anything that you copy-paste just becomes part of the HTML. So you can paste the times into your website. You can paste anything that you want in there. And so a lot of the editors are dealing with paying down the challenges that arise from having chosen to use content editable in the first place. Really, what a lot of those editors leave you with is a big bowl of tag soup. And you're not quite sure what's in there or why it got in there. And importantly, over time, you actually end up having your tag soup be full of other stuff as well. So as soon as you have the ability to write an article for a website like Bustle or a website like New York Times or anything like that, you're going to want the ability to embed things in it, right? You're going to want to say, oh, I want to put a tweet in here. I want to maybe put a dynamic poll or something like that. And ideally, you want to let authors just be able to choose from those things without you needing to call you up as a programmer and have you run through them. And because you're going to save the HTML that comes from this, you end up throwing lots of stuff into the HTML at edit time. Eventually, you have this big kind of indecipherable soup, and you're not quite sure what's in there anymore. So you take the soup, and you save it, and you send it to your server. And then maybe someone needs to edit, so you take the soup, and you send it back to them again. And the editors are pretty good, of course, at reading the things that their own kind of soup. Whatever they spit out, they're actually OK at loading it back up and letting you work with it again. Some of the stuff can be challenging, like if you do actually have HTML in there that represents a tweet, then it can be kind of tricky to say that, oh, this part is not going to be editable. So they can't put their cursor in there. And we also take the soup, that same soup of HTML, and we ship it down to the end user on the website. And of course, this is where we get like a little bit of a security thing, so we have to put something that can filter out the bad parts of the soup from the good part of the soup. And this is a pretty standard architecture, right? Who's built like an architecture like this? Yeah, so like a lot of people have solved the problem using HTML tools like this. I think that there's a lot of extra complexity in here and a lot of problems that kind of hold us back from taking on some other things. But you know, everyone's successful with it, so totally cool. And we could say that we're going to be done, but not quite. Because the complexity that we added to this thing to make a solution, the solution that we chose brought along its own set of problems. So what are some of the problems with having chosen to use content editable? Not just from this perspective of how do I get the tag soup to be kind of clean, but what are like the real architectural things that it keeps us from doing? I think there are kind of four. The context of this document, you have an HTML document that you're going to pass around, right? They're all basically the same document no matter where you use it. If you have an author who's editing something and you have a reader who's reading it, they see the exact same HTML. That seems kind of strange because you can imagine that authors would want some kind of extra functionality when they're working with something that readers don't. And you see people struggling with that when they have custom solutions. Also, readers actually have different environments that they work with, right? Readers can be on desktop or readers can be on mobile, and they might not want the same HTML representation of that document. Say you want to use Google's AMP project for your mobile viewers. Like, how are you going to change the HTML to render in an AMP-compatible way for those people, but not for the readers on your own website? And last, there's like an actual limitation of portability. What if you don't want to render to HTML at all? You have to parse the HTML and then come up with something and convert it to something else, and that's going to definitely be really painful. Rich content is basically write once when you are an author of a document and you go ahead and throw a whole bunch of special rich content in there. That's pretty much it. Like, you want to link to a YouTube video, it takes the HTML for the video tag and things like that and just throws it in there. And if you ever want to change it, you have to understand how to parse that HTML back out, which is challenging and kind of messy. HTML is expensive and tricky to make safe. You're basically running another browser on your server that parses the DOM, parses the HTML, turns it into DOM, and then re-renders that whole thing back out as a string again. And that's like a clumsy extra step that it seems like should not be necessary. And last, it's not a universal solution. So say you have been using the tricks editor for 3 months in your product, and then you come up with some limitation in its API where you're like, man, I can't use tricks, I gotta go to Quill. Quill is looking really cool these days. I don't know if you can do it. Like, they're both saving HTML, but they're both their special kind of soup. And especially if you have really extra special rich content things, there's no portability between those. You can't just swap the editor that you're using. So you've kind of like bought into one editor that you're stuck with for the duration. So you can think of this like a grid. So the editor basically spits out soup, and so you get soup all the way through the system. And a couple of people have realized that this is a problem. If you throw rich content into it, then your rich content just sticks in the soup, and it's kind of difficult to deal with. In the last 9 months, there's been a couple different people who have figured out that this is not an ideal way to solve the problem of content editing, and we've seen a couple solutions come out. So I want to talk about some other people's solutions first. The first one is Prosmere, and Prosmere is authored by the main guy behind CodeMere, and he did a really, really good job. The Prosmere editor, it does a great job of taking content editable and passing it through its own like abstract syntax tree. So instead of actually dealing with the HTML inside of Prosmere's internals, it just deals with the HTML as an interface. It's just the UI that you're dealing with. They immediately, as soon as possible, transfer into their own abstract format where they have more control, and you can deal with it programmatically if you wanted to edit the document. Prosmere is very focused on Markdown. The author just loves Markdown, so it saves into Markdown. And then when you render it, you just pass it through a Markdown renderer, and you get back your HTML document. Of course, you're limited by whatever Markdown can do, right? So say you do want to throw rich content into this, you're kind of screwed. There's no real way that you can pass this all the way down into Markdown and represent it in a meaningful way and have it be parsed back out in an editable format. Not unless you start creating a custom version of Markdown, which of course is what many people do. The second one is DraftJS, and DraftJS is a project that came out of Facebook. It's coupled to React right now, although they try to say that it doesn't need to be coupled to React. I'm not quite sure how true I think that is, but it is an editor that is pretty awesome. It also parses into an abstract tree, but then instead of saving to HTML or saving to mobile doc, something like that, they actually suggest that you come up with a serialization of the DraftJS abstract yourself, and then you ship that to your server as a JSON payload. But it's basically, DraftJS has one or two neat tricks. One of them is that it uses an immutable data structure for representing the document. They just say, here's the data structure, you figure out how to store it. Like, figure out what you want to look like in the future. And I think the big limitation is that the DraftJS abstract tree and what you're sending to the server are actually the same thing. So if, say, DraftJS updates what they want the data version of their implementation to be, then the format that they save is coupled to that, which seems like it's not a great long-term thing, because you can't imagine that they think they've made the perfect decision for their abstract tree. This has pretty good support for rich content. So rich content in DraftJS is kind of like a node on a DOM tree, on a tree that represents your document, and that gets passed around the whole thing. And when you render it again, you just pass it back through DraftJS. And one of the neat things is that on the HTML side, the UI, of course, is HTML when you're looking at the Giphy embed. However, when you're storing it in the abstract tree, you could choose to store it as data instead. So it's not stored as actual HTML, it's properties that represent what is the URL for this thing. And then at runtime, when you render it, you can choose what to do with that. The solution that we've been working on tried to take a little bit of a different approach. A lot of these people were, I think the core thing that a lot of people realized all at the same time was that having an abstract tree to represent this content instead of just using the HTML, the DOM itself to represent the document was a good idea. I think the thing that nobody took far enough was going all the way to the persistence format and thinking about what does this actually feel like when I save it on the server and what are the implications of that system. So we've tried to think of this from a document format up mechanism. MobileDoc is a format that we've been working on with Bustle, and it's been out there for about 9 months now, something like that. It's a documented data structure, so we have specifications that tell you what all the different parts mean, so you're not shooting around in the dark guessing, what is this property, how does this section correspond to another one. Importantly, because we want it to behave like a standard, it's versioned, So if you have documents that are stored in your database and they're version 1.1, then when we release 2.0, say, we can write a migrator that just migrates 1.1 to 2.0, and we can share that with all the people who are currently using MobileDoc, and they'd all be able to update all their documents to the new editor format. Supports runtime and dynamic content. We have a concept called cards and a concept called atoms. Cards are block form content, like you can imagine a poll that would be in a New York Times post where people would be able to like submit votes, and that the author, when they create this, they need a UI for saying, I want my first option to be Obama and my second option to be McCain or something like that. Wow, that really dates me. Yeah, so you can imagine they have a UI that lets you edit like that, and then when you render it at runtime, you just want to display the results of the poll or let people vote on the poll. And cards are a construct that works like that. Atoms are a construct that is inline, and they behave like a single character. So you can imagine a really rich API for emojis or something like that that would allow someone to autocomplete to an emoji and then slap that into the text and everyone can see it. And then the last thing is that it's portable. Portable in that because it's just an arbitrary data format, it's uncoupled to HTML. So if you wanted to write a renderer or an editor for MobileDoc that would work on native iOS or native Android, this is something that you can definitely do. Nobody's done this yet, but people have talked about it. However, we've designed it to be really fast to actually spit out HTML. And so our like loop here looks a little bit different because we take the soup, we pass it through a thing called MobileDoc Kit, which is like an SDK for working with MobileDoc. In the server, you store the MobileDoc documents, but then when you render, you choose at runtime how you want to deal with this and what you want to render it to, and you can pass it through any of a number of systems. The DOM render is something that we've worked on and is out there floating around. We've used it for server side and for client side. We have an AMP render that we've used server side for things in conjunction with Ember Fastboot to render documents. Nobody's written an iOS or Android renderer yet. There's a Facebook Instant render, and there's actually renders written in non-JavaScript languages. So someone wrote a renderer in Ruby, someone wrote one in Elixir that both spit out HTML based on the documents. And when we do embedded rich content like this, it's kind of neat because at runtime, in the renderer, at that level, you get to choose how Giphy is going to be displayed. So if you're doing a native version of your document that's going to render on iOS, you can choose that, oh, this Giphy thing is actually going to display as some kind of like view layout system instead of as DOM or as HTML. I think I have enough time to attempt a quick thing. Let's see, where is the screen? There it is. Cool. So this is a really, really quick demo of what MobileDoc is. This is just a demo site that we have up. But it's got all the things that you'd expect from an editor. Whoops. But you've got hotkeys and all that other stuff. All that works like you would expect. Kind of the neat thing is when you look at the cards. So for example, here's a really simple card with inputs. And we can have this card here that says I'm in display mode, and we can see that I can't put a cursor inside of it, right? This is like a card. It's not part of my normal editing interface. So here's my cursor, and it pops around it, but this content is actually block form content that has its own runtime implementation. It's like a component in Ember or React or any other framework that you might deal with, where it gets a runtime decision about what its implementation is. Because it's just JavaScript, it can also have a UI and do whatever it wants. So in the editor's interface over here on the left, I can go ahead and edit this card and save this guy. And we can see my document is updating here. This is the actual MobileDoc data structure itself, which is pretty simple. And on the right here, we have a runtime implementation where we've rendered that card out and we've rendered the content around it. Of course, a more interesting, cool card would be something like embedding code mirror into this. So say you wanted code snippets. Well, here's this guy. Change let const. Seems totally cool. We can see on the right-hand side, there's the actual thing that outputs. And these are, not only are they like, they're like first-class citizens in your content. So I could take this from code mirror into at the end here, and I could cut that, and I come down here and paste it again, and I get my content. I could paste it further down the document, and I get it again. So they're like first-class parts. This rich content is really part of the experience of writing, and the editors don't need to think, oh, this is like a delicate part of the UI. They can just do the normal things that they want to do with it. Last neat demo is, of course, to do a token selfie card, because we can't. Oh, but I can't see where the button is. Whoops, sorry. Tiny screen. And then you get this this is a really lazy implementation, so it's just embedding it into the document. But all the way at the right here, there's some runtime version of this card. Where is my cursor? Sorry, I cannot find where my cursor is. It's over here. There it is. Cool. Yeah, so we think focusing on the data format and the capabilities of the format, instead of just focusing on how to deal with content editable and mash around with the soup, is the more interesting problem. And we think that that's the thing that unlocks a lot of different potentials in web editors that kind of haven't been present before. At Bustle, we've been able to build a new content management system that uses this. That's built in Ember, and then that renders articles on an Ember-based website that renders normal article content on the web. It renders AMP content. That same editor also writes content that's rendered by a Riot app that renders it for, I think, regular web and for AMP as well. There's a Facebook instant rendering. So by focusing on the format itself, we've been able to have a lot of flexibility and really free the authors to do whatever they want. There's some other companies who are using it. New.aia.org is a project that Christopher C. and Ed Faulkner and a couple people here in New York just finished and launched. And they use MobileDoc where they're saving it into a Drupal database, and then they've built a fresh, new editing experience around the Drupal backend. And then a company called HSTRY that lets you make timelines that some of you might be familiar with is using it. So we're out there in the wild being used, and we think that the benefits of a portable, stable format are real and not just academic things. Okay, one more bee to put in your bonnet. I can see someone off stage who's giving me eyes. Getting worried. Okay, so everyone knows these two editors, right? Vim and Emacs. Vim people, raise a hand. Yeah, Emacs people, raise a hand. Oh, you're so lonely. Okay, so what makes these editors so popular, right? Is it that one of them uses J for moving around and one uses an arrow key? I don't think that's what it is. Most of you don't even use one of these editors, but you do probably use one of this whole suite of editors that exist, right? And so why do we have awesome options for these editors, but for web content editors, we have kind of crappy options? And I want to say that it's the same reason that you have a pretty good car and the same reason that Microsoft is really flush with cash. So roads are just roads, and cars can drive on them, and you can drive a bike, you can drive a limo, you can do an electric car, you can do whatever you want. If you don't like your limo, then you can sell your limo and get a smart car. If you don't like your smart car, you can swap to a bike. There's nothing that stops you from using any of these devices with the thing that they operate on that road. Microsoft built its balance sheet on Microsoft Windows, but they also created Microsoft Office, of course. And one of the ways that they wanted to ensure that they would make money on Office was to make sure that you stuck around. You kept using Office, and you didn't go to use something else. They wanted you to metaphorically have a car that would only drive on the roads that Microsoft had paved. And a company named Novell sued them in 2004. And Novell had their own text editing product called WordPerfect. WordPerfect was really popular with lawyers, so it was probably evil. But they really wanted to be compatible with the Microsoft Office rich text format. And so they spent a lot of time reverse engineering it. When Microsoft realized this, they would just kind of tweak rich text format a little bit every time they put out Office and be like, ha ha. Yeah. So WordPerfect sued them, and they sued them on the basis that they were stopping the market from innovating. And I think that's kind of what happens today. The moment that you choose a rich text editor, you're getting locked in to their format. The moment you choose it, it's instant death for the agility of your project. You can't take tricks and say, I want to go with Quill. You can't start with DraftJS and say, I want to swap to Prosmere. And so because you're locked in, you become so enamored with the features of your one thing, right? Pros.js must be the best because I chose it a year ago. I think we can do a lot better, and if we try and focus on building standards for these things that they can interop based on, MobileDoc we think is a pretty good start, and we would like to see and work with other editors to try and get them to share a common format. If that means that we need to move to where they are or they need to move to where we are, we're totally happy to see that happen. But we think if we do that, we can unlock more innovation and more competition than exists today in this market. And that's the final thought I'd like to leave you with. So thank you very much.
Come on over to our couch. Isn't this couch amazing, you guys? I don't know where it came
away.
from, but it's beautiful. Who's far away?
You're sitting so far away.
Oh, because I have to, it's a power move. Don't worry about it.
Oh, I have to move to you.
All right, so let's see. If Ember wasn't an option, and let's be serious, Ember is the only option. But if in an alternate universe Ember wasn't an option, what would be your ride or die framework?
I don't know. Maybe I'm dodging the question. But I have, one of the reasons I got back into JavaScript was because I used to really love MooTools. MooTools had a really robust object system, and it was awesome. And when jQuery rose to dominance, I remember I was sad because I saw this callback hell being thrown all over the place. And it was really early, and callback hell wasn't really a term yet, but I basically did not buy the programming model that was so heavily based on just DOM selectors. I thought that MooTools gave you abstractions to build more complex things. And so the thing that dragged me back into JavaScript was really finding something like Ember that treated your ability to build abstractions as a first-class thing. And I guess maybe Angular does that more than React does that. I'm not sure if any of the micro frameworks like Vue or Durandal or anything really take objects and classes and interfaces and treat them like first-class concepts.
Amazing. That was a really thoughtful answer. One of the things I loved about working with Matthew at Bustle was that you would ask him a question, or there was a PR, and his response to that PR was a novel. It was amazing.
Yeah, sorry.
Perfect. No, it was perfect. It was perfect. Okay, if you could run a marathon in someone else's shoes, who would it be?
Holy shit.
You're a runner.
It's got to be Bolt. Right? I mean, who else's shoes would you want to run him in? He's definitely got the right shoes.
He does have the right shoes. All right. And then in 3 words or less, why should everyone in this room start using MobileDoc today?
Your editor sucks.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. You may leave.